That fall smell really takes me back to my youth. You know what else takes me back to my youth? A Yokomo MX-4. Hello and welcome to Quiet RC. As usual, I am Rob. Today we are finally getting around to my Yokomo MX-4, the recreation created by Rubrix Racing Products. We're getting to build it today. So let's get to it. Oh, let's find out if you can go back. Shh. It is finally time to get to the MX-4 build. You know what I should have out here too? It's not only my original box from my MX-4, but also the Rubrix Racing Products box, which is what this car is. This is technically the RX-4 for Rubrix. Now, I did a whole unboxing of this car and gave some history behind the actual MX-4 and Masami Hirosaki and Stan Masaki Hirosaki. However, you may have noticed there are some videos coming out on the MX-4 Forever, which is created by Masami and Masaki and comes in like a really beautiful wooden box, but is limited to 100 copies. The really brief kind of Cliff Notes version of that particular version that they're recreating is Masami was going to be headed to, I believe it was the Worlds, in 2001 with this new version of the MX-4 that he and his father had created. However, the September 11th attacks happened here in the US and the race was scrapped, and by the time that they got to the next race, they had moved on from that particular model. So it was actually never campaigned. And that's why they are creating 100 of those this year for that purpose. However, about 2 years ago, Ruben Gonzalez at Rubrix Racing started to recreate the original MX-4, and I reached out to him, asked if I could actually get a version that I was going to be able to build myself, and he obliged. But he also put together a instruction manual. Now, I spent about an hour on the phone with him earlier this week going over the actual instructions and some pointers and some things that I thought just needed to be clarified or maybe just kind of formatted a little differently. He actually made the point of calling this an installation guide because we both agreed that it would be very difficult for anybody to kind of recreate instruction manuals at the level of, like, say, a Tamiya or something like that. However, I did use this, and for a couple of the steps, I actually went and got the original MX-4 manual from Competition X. As far as I know, this would have been pretty much the exact manual that I used to build my original one back in the late 90s, early 2000s. No, it would have been, yeah, it would have been late 90s. So this one actually says 1998 on it, which makes sense. Let's go ahead and start with the actual build of this itself. As I mentioned, I did an unboxing video of this. I go over all the bags and stuff that everything came in. And this video is probably going to be a little choppy because I'm going to be jumping back and forth between my notes and the actual build, installation, manual, whatever you want to call it. The bags themselves were actually not bagged in order of the instructions. And when I talked to Ruben about this, he said that when he bagged it, he just kind of did all of that first and then went back much later and created this installation guide, mostly based on how he built all of them. As a refresher, mine is actually the 10th one that he put out there, though I asked for a special serial number designation of 013, my lucky number. He had already built about 9 of these, plus some special editions, or EVOs, I think is what he calls them. I know he'll probably end up seeing this video and he'll be happy to correct me. But by that point he had built a few, so he was just kind of going off of how he built them and not necessarily the bag order. The first steps that you're doing is you're actually putting the battery post and the top deck post here. And what he mentions in the instructions is that on one side, the battery strap, the carbon fiber battery strap, is you do need to carve out a little bit to allow for the actual battery posts, which hold it level. After having put this together, I think on the other side, I might need to actually chamfer part of the battery tray just to get those original style sub-C cell batteries in here, because on this side I'm having trouble getting the actual pins in to hold the batteries in place. This is actually right away you kind of diverge from what the original manual is having you do and what Rubrix is having you do, which is you're going to actually put together the rear motor, plate, and mount to kind of start to build up the chassis itself. Next, you're going to get into actually building the diffs. The front and rear diffs are very similar, but there is a slight difference between them. Now, originally, I was actually sent the wrong diff, and Ruben got the correct diff out to me right away, so I was able to continue with the build and building the diffs here. Now, that is a part of the build that I actually went to the original manual, because as you can see, there's actually quite a bit going on here. In the manual, it's just kind of like build the diff, but I'm not talented enough to just build the diff just looking at the parts. So I used the original manual, and that was pretty much in line with what I had in front of me. He did include some stealth diff lube with the kit. I actually had some on hand, which I guess if you're building this particular chassis, this is probably not your first rodeo, so you're gonna have a lot of this stuff laying around. One thing I will mention is I am very thankful that the higher end kits of today have moved almost exclusively to Hex hardware. Ruben did keep this more original with Masami's Worlds edition, or Worlds chassis, and he used the Phillips head screws, both the kind of pan head and the flat head, and boy, it really makes you thankful that everybody's moved to Hex stuff for the higher end stuff. I did the trick where you kind of dab a little bit of the tip of your Hex driver into the lube, then you pick up a ball, put it in place, and then I just put a thin layer of diff lube around the actual differential with a brush, just so it was a nice thin layer and didn't get too messy. Then you move on to the front suspension and steering and drive shafts. The drive shafts look very similar. However, they are different. In the instruction manual, which I missed actually, Ruben does point out that the front and rear are different. And he gives you both the drive shaft and the actual axle measurement so you can pick the right one, which I ultimately did, but I think I had to take it apart and do it over again. I also had to disassemble the front a couple of times and redo it for a couple different reasons. The holes are very close. However, you do have to kind of loosely put everything together. In the manual, it says to use the top plate first to align everything, which I agree with. However, it does say to tighten it down, but he's going to amend it to leave it a little bit loose, so it kind of holds everything in place. You put the bottom plate on the bumper, and then you kind of go and you just kind of tighten everything a little by little, just kind of rotating around, and that'll get everything nice and square. What I did though is I did all that, and then I forgot to make sure that the belt was actually onto the front pulley here. So make sure you don't forget about that, because you will have to undo everything. You can't really just slide it on there. It's too tight. As you're doing the whole front end here, there are obviously 4 turnbuckles to do, the upper camber links and then the steering links. I had no idea what the actual length was that I needed for those 4. He did provide the length for the steering, the one that actually comes off of the bell crank. He is going to go back and add kind of your initial setup length to help you out when you actually put this together. The shims that you use on the outer for the C-hubs and the knuckles, everything like that, those are very difficult to get in, but you do eventually get them in. I would recommend when you are building the back part of this tower that's going to hold on specifically your camber links, I would put those on the actual screws that go through first, because it's very difficult to get the angle you need to tighten everything up afterwards. The rear arms, in the guide it has you putting in several shims. Now the arms that came with my kit already had a small little kind of spacer molded into the arm itself, so I really didn't need all the spacers. I ended up using just a 0.5 millimeter washer. Again, after talking with Ruben, he has different arms that are included now, so it is going to be closer to what's in the guide. And I actually had to drill out the holes for the hinge pins a little bit. The 3 millimeter drill bit that I had was still a little too tight, but the 3.2 millimeter one was too loose. So what I ended up doing was I had the 3 millimeter bit, and then I just kind of did the thing where you wiggle it a little bit, and that gave me just enough to get it in there without it binding up. And because the pins were actually attaching to a aluminum mount, I decided to just put a little bit of Tamiya's anti-wear grease. Again, you may have a lot of this stuff just laying around. It's not something I don't think you need to like go and pick up. Maybe you can use a little Molly grease or something like that, or don't use anything. I'm not your boss. Once you've done the rear, you've done the front now, you're gonna finish off the top deck. You know, one of the kind of signature things from this era of Yokomo is this top deck with this spring in it. So you are going to assemble that. Now I can't remember if it came partially assembled or not. I don't recall, but it's not that complicated, I believe. The guide said to use some 6mm pan heads. I think all I had included with it were 8mm. Obviously that works. It just sticks up a little bit. Not that big of a deal. Biggest issue that I came across was the rear and these what are called Darylin plastic mounts, where these upright parts of the bulkhead where the bearings go into, everything like that, they weren't quite lined up just right. So I did have to, again, kind of open up some of the holes to get everything to kind of line up correctly. I also, now all of this has actually been fixed in these kits now that he's putting out there. So this kind of won't be of a concern to you, but just telling you what I did. The clearance for the spur gear and this top plate in the rear, it was touching. So I actually had to kind of shave down the spur gear that was given to me. Ruben's offered to send me another top plate, but I've already done the work, so it's fine. I don't need anything. I did have to shave this spur gear down. I believe I went from, it was about 4.5mm wide, the spur gear, and I shaved it down to just a little over 3mm. So I took almost 1.5 mm off of the spur gear. And yeah, I did open up the top plate holes a little bit to allow that that Darylin bulkhead to fit properly. Now in the rear here, there is this brace that goes across, and it actually fits onto the rear hinge pins that stick out. And when I was building the kit, I put it on there. You know, this is kind of one of the last steps you're getting to. And I was like, how does this thing even stay on? And this kind of sat 98% completed for maybe 2 months. I didn't really take the body out of the packaging or anything like that. And really what it comes down to is when you do this rear chassis cover, it folds up over the back, and that's what holds that little plate in place, that little brace. This body is an original Yokomo MX-4 body. The rear, the under trays, they're actually molding themselves. And I think he might have mentioned that they're molding bodies now from, he got a hold of an original body for another model. And again, I'm gonna get this kind of incorrect, but basically it comes down to they're popping their own bodies now, which is great because it's obviously very difficult to come around unused, unpainted ones. However, he does offer, if you get like a fully built kit, he does offer a bunch of different paint schemes. You can go on to the Rubrix website, get bodies that are pre-painted. When you do this under tray, it has cut lines on it for you. However, you are gonna have to do a little bit of massaging to get it just right into place. Tip that I would have is when you go to actually fit it onto the bottom, you're gonna have to punch your own holes for the screws that go in the top here. Let me hold it up. Hopefully that's coming across there. And then you kind of fold this whole thing around underneath, and I would do that all first before you go and mark the holes where it goes underneath that bumper. Because I did it the other way around and ended up having to open up those holes a little bit more because it was kind of warping how it was sitting on the chassis. Really quickly here, please take a moment to like, and certainly please subscribe if you aren't already. Also have some decals for Quiet RC that are available down below. Putting the wheel hubs on, they were very tight. However, once you get them started, you can actually just start tightening the nuts down, and that'll push everything into place. The wheels on the RX-4 are these, multi-spoked wheels. When it was actually raced, they had wheel dots that went over them, so they were decals that went over it and just flattened it out. Ruben does include those with the kit, but I just think it looks so good with these wheels on here that I think I'm gonna leave it off for a while. And on that subject, much to Ruben's chagrin, I am probably not going to run this, at least for a while. I have vintage electronics in here for the most part, except for the servo. I don't know why, I always have a hard time finding vintage servos. But I have, old match cells, NiCads that are obviously no good anymore. I have a Reedy Sonic, and I can't remember exactly what turn it is, but for sure I did mention it in the unboxing video. I have this small GM V12, we didn't used to say brushed ESC, we just said ESC, there was no brushless. And then I have this Tekin receiver. These would have been almost exactly what I had in the car back in the day, except for this Tekin receiver is actually a 27 megahertz. I would have definitely had a 75. And I don't even have wiring up yet because it just looks so good just kind of looking at it here. So yeah, I think it's just gonna go on the shelf for a while. I am going to paint the body. I'm just really gun shy about doing it because I'm not 100% sure if I want to recreate exactly or close to exactly my old car from back in the day, or if I want to just kind of update it a little bit now that my skills have gotten just very marginally better with the airbrush. It's a beautiful kit. I'm so happy to have it in my collection. I'm really excited to put it up on the shelf and be able to look at it every day. Lastly, please like and subscribe. Give us a comment below. Also, our decals, like it's some huge operation here. The decals for Quiet RC are available in the links down below. Really helps out the channel. Obviously, this does not come cheap, so it'd be nice to have just a little bit of help. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you, and we'll talk RC again later.